Welcome, Mr. Raskin, to our series of the Professional Development Speaker Series for college students. We're very, very pleased to have you. And for the rest of us, I'm going to give just a little brief introduction. I'm sure that you all know about Jamie Raskin's current position, but you may not know where he hails from or some other things that are going on with him. So Jamie Raskin is an American author and politician. He serves as our U.S. representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District. He's been doing that since 2017. Our 8th District is located in Montgomery County, so extends through rural Frederick County and all the way to the Pennsylvania border. So it's a large area. Mr. Raskin was previously a member of the Maryland State Senate from 2007 until 2016, so a good 9 long years there. He's also a professor of constitutional law at American University, and a frequent speaker on issues of critical importance to us as a society. As an aside, I have to tell you, Mr. Raskin's name is a portmanteau, is that how you say it, of my maiden and married last names, Hopkins and Razavi. So that has always been something that allows me to feel like I have a nice personal connection to Mr. Raskin as well. He is our esteemed guest of honor this evening. The topic of our discussion tonight is how to be a political change agent in a time of chaos. So could not be more timely.
So, and I, just to lay my cards on the table then, I am an ardent true blue Democrat. I don't pretend to be much more than that, okay? But I thought I would begin by invoking our last great Republican president as a gesture of bipartisanship, Abraham Lincoln. Okay, so now Lincoln spoke of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, right? And those were the beautiful, majestic words he issued forth from the battlefield at Gettysburg in 1863. That has not been the reality of America. That is the tantalizing ideal of America. We began as a slave republic of Christian white male property owners over the age of 21, but it has been through successive waves of social and political struggle, change making, and constitutional amendment and statutory enfranchisement that we've opened America up to being much closer to Lincoln's ideal. And so you can read the Constitution as I do, and as a professor of constitutional law, I spend all my time reading the Constitution, but you can read the Constitution and the amendments that we've adopted since the Bill of Rights, since the original 10, as a chronicle of this process of democratization and enlargement of voting and expansion of political participation, right? So the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. The 14th Amendment establishes equal protection and due process. The 15th Amendment extended voting rights regardless of race. The 17th Amendment shifted the mode of election of US senators from the state legislatures to the people. The 19th Amendment, whose centennial anniversary we observe this year, gave women the right to vote and struck down the gender barrier to voting. The 23rd Amendment gave our friends down the street in Washington, D.C., the right to participate in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes in federal elections. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. The 25th Amendment, established some principles for continuity in office and safeguarding the office of the presidency against presidents who might not be able to successfully execute the powers and duties of office. But all of it basically has been an attempt to perfect the governmental arrangements and to expand the democracy to have the reality meet, the first 3 beautiful, dazzling words of the Constitution, we the people, right? And it's been an effort to fulfill that promise. And the promises that Jefferson, that great but deeply compromised founder, put into the Declaration of Independence about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and about all men, and today we can say women, being created equal, and about the consent of the governed being the heart of the democratic process. So for me, democracy is about getting the procedures right so everybody has the opportunity to participate and to make their case, and to try to use the various implements of government to achieve what their dream is. And that really is the American dream, that all of us could be in a place where we can achieve our private goals and our public goals together in a way that reconciles the individual with the community. So, to be a change maker, I think you could think of negative and positive change makers, right? I mean, the way to be a negative change maker today is to exploit whatever talents you have to try to get into government, to use the government as an instrument of self-enrichment and money making for you and your friends. That's the way to be a negative change maker. The way to be a positive change maker is to use whatever talents you have in order to try to restore the vision of the government as an instrument for the common good in the public interest, for benefiting everybody. The opportunities for leadership in a democratic society, in a society that strives to be democratic, are almost endless, because you can be a leader at Montgomery College, you can be a leader within Montgomery County, you can be a leader in the Montgomery County Council, you can run for Congress, you can run for state legislature, you can participate in the mass movements that are changing the consciousness of the time, like Black Lives Matter, which has been the single most comprehensive and effective response to President Trump. And Trump has mastered the art not only of dominating the stage and the spotlight, but also of generating chaos and confusion wherever he goes. And one of the things that I've been reflecting about with Black Lives Matter is that it has put the moral spotlight back on the real problems of the country. My friends across the aisle like to talk about the deep state, and the deep state in their handling is really just anybody who opposes Donald Trump, is the deep state. But the real deep state has been discovered by Black Lives Matter. The real deep state is white supremacy that has been built so much into our institutions, into our original Constitution. In 1857, the Supreme Court said, unfortunately, it was a Marylander writing, Justice Taney, but the Supreme Court said that the Constitution is a white man's compact, and that African Americans have no rights the white man is bound to respect. And then the Supreme Court, even after the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments in 1896 in Plessy versus Ferguson, determined that Jim Crow, American apartheid, was perfectly constitutional and didn't violate equal protection or due process rights or the Reconstruction Amendments. And that inaugurated a period that the Wall Street Journal reporter Douglas Blackman has called slavery by another name. Jim Crow, apartheid, and political, economic, social domination throughout the South that lasted really until the second reconstruction of the modern civil rights movement that began with Bob Moses and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organizing in Mississippi, going door to door, and inventing the slogan of one person, one vote, which came not from the Supreme Court originally, but came from civil rights activists saying one person, one vote. That is the meaning of democracy, that each one of us counts, each person's voice counts. So the Supreme Court, I know everybody is despairing about the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the spectacle that we just saw of, the president and our new justice partying together at that super spreader event extravaganza. And then last night, again, meeting to celebrate and everything. Remember, this is to give you hope. It's not to bum you out. The Supreme Court has been a profoundly reactionary conservative institution for the vast majority of American history. There were a few decades there around Brown versus Board of Education, Roe versus Wade, Miranda versus Arizona, the white primary line of cases, where the Warren Court really did, for the very first time, put the Supreme Court on the side of the people. But what we've seen since in the Berger Court, the Rehnquist Court today, especially in the Roberts Court, in the court that's been remade by Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, the court has retreated to the baseline of being on the side of the wealthy and the powerful and those with class privilege against everybody else. And so that's not to say you give up on it. I don't think we give up on it. We got to figure out how to deal with it, because in addition to everything else, it's extremely activist court. It is very active about striking down the laws passed by the people. And we could be headed for a time here, depending on what happens in the election, where we have Democratic majorities reclaiming the momentum of Democratic progress in the country and trying to confront the real problems of the country, like COVID-19 and climate change, in a context where you have a court that is bending over backwards to try to strike down the laws of the people. And that is what I foresee and predict for this period. But I would say, given that we are in a time of chaos that has been set loose in the land, a time of plague, a time of absolute dereliction of duty with respect to developing a national plan to defeat the disease. And we, of course, lead the world in COVID-19 infections. We lead the world in COVID-19 deaths. We lead the world in COVID-19 propaganda and disinformation and lies. In this time when for a lot of Americans, we're the wealthiest state in the history of the human species, right? But for a lot of people, it's a failed state. A failed state is one that fails to deliver the basic goods of existence to the population, like protection against disease, like protection against random gun violence, like protection against crazed ideologues showing up with weapons of war in your kindergarten class or in your church or your synagogue or your mosque or your Walmart, right? Protection of the healthcare of the people, protection against people prostituting the government for purposes of self-enrichment and private aggrandizement and so on. So this creates opportunities, extraordinary opportunities for leadership, because we need to move into a period of rebuilding, or not to be too romantic about it, reconstruction. It might be time for the third reconstruction in America, where we've got to deal not with one crisis, but multiple crises. The crisis of racism and police brutality, the opioid crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, the public health crisis generally, climate change, and so on. So all of the brilliant, engaged young people out there have been getting such a political education during this time. You are needed, you are necessary. Don't feel despondent and hopeless. My late father used to say, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. You are the hope, right? So we need you all engaged. And I can't tell you specifically what to do, because I don't know what your gifts and your talents are, but you know what your gifts and talents are. And your teachers know what your gifts and talents are. And your family knows what your gifts and talents are. And your friends know. So figure out what it is really that you have to contribute. And you can get involved at any level. Right now, there are a myriad of opportunities and a myriad of needs. And I'm doing everything in my power with Speaker Pelosi for us to pass the HEROES Act, which was now the much delayed, because we passed it 5 months ago, but the much delayed package of aid to continue what we did back in the CARES Act. There are trillions of dollars of need in the country, at the state level, at the county level, at the municipal level, in terms of hunger, in terms of healthcare, in terms of public health infrastructure, in terms of education, in terms of schooling. Our youngest daughter, who graduated from the University of Maryland this last year, is in Teach for America. She's teaching in Philadelphia, algebra. She has 140 students in 4 different classes. She's trying to do it over Zoom. It's very difficult work, but I tell her every day, she is a change maker, and she's changing the lives of those young people by what she is doing. And so all of you have got the opportunity to be great. Like Dr. King said, all of us have the opportunity to be great, because all of us have the opportunity to serve. So I'll close with that thought, and the floor is open.
Okay, I'm coming off mute. That was amazing. Oh my goodness. And I'll tell you, I wrote down a bunch of questions as I had, but I also saw people pop in. So I want to make sure that those who are listening get their questions answered. There were some good ones. And so I'm going to start here at the top because the early bird gets the question. And let me make sure I'm, whoops, not that much at the top, and see what we've got here. Now, there were some excellent questions here, and I really appreciate your perspective. That's not a doom and gloom perspective in light of the fact that we've got incredible challenges. So I personally just want to thank you for that. Reminding us that the future is in our hands, and
It is. The
yeah,
doom and gloom is lifting. It's lifting quickly. So
yeah.
yeah, you can read me all the questions. I'll try to answer each one as quickly as I can.
Okay. I'm going through. There were so many people who were just kind of popping in there a minute. Would you kind of, well, someone would like me to introduce you to specifically. I think that they can probably reach you the same way that I did. So I will handle that one later. Speak about, okay, so this is one of our faculty members who's online with us, and he would like you to speak about constitutional considerations in Trump's effort to control the election results. And there are a few questions around the
Yeah.
election, what we might be able to.
Well, look, the president has no role in it. I mean, we know the president will be jawboning immediately, the minute the polls close. I won the election. I know I won it. Anything else is fraud, chaos, blah, blah, blah. I mean, just tune it out and tell everybody to tune it out. The president's got no role. This is all controlled at the state level. It's state ballot election authorities who have a process that is well established. It works very well in most parts of the country. And we'll wait for the results. And, I mean, anybody can say whatever they want. The First Amendment applies to everybody, including the president, but he's entitled to no more deference on that than anybody else in the country.
Okay, fantastic. And there were actually a couple questions related to this, but that are tied to the Supreme Court, because there's some worry that the Supreme Court is going to weigh in on the election. And so there's that question about what we can do. And then Carissa Silver is also asking if it's possible to impeach Supreme Court justices. So,
Well, constitutionally, you can impeach them, but it's the same percentages you need. I mean, it's a majority in the House and it's 2/3 in the Senate in order to convict and remove someone. And it's for high crimes and misdemeanors, treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty hypothetical. But I mean, hey, if it turned out that there's some recording that somebody out there has of the president telling Amy Baird, "I'll put you on the court, but you've got to agree to decide the election for me," and that comes out, I'll be the first one to introduce impeachment there. If you can show me a corrupt bargain, but it might be tough to do it just because, she engages in the same kind of politicization that the other conservative justices have done. I mean, it's gonna be tough given the Republicans in the Senate. I mean, I'm sorry to put it in partisan terms, but it is what it is.
Okay, good. Thank you. And then we have a question about climate. So the question from Lucas is, if we're going to transition from oil to clean energy, we need to train people of the fossil fuel industry to adjust to solar and hydroelectric and wind power industries. And so how would you recommend we get society moving in that direction?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's the right question, because if we're really going to do a Green New Deal and we're going to, engage in a massive reconstruction of our energy systems and our environmental laws to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as we need to do to save our species, we got to take care of the people who are in the oil and gas industry and so on. I'm glad that Joe Biden was very tough in the last debate and said we're going to have to transition away. We are, but we're going to have to transition in a way that takes care of the people who are part of it. And let's put it this way, the costs of paying for that transition are a pittance compared to the cost of not doing anything and just going down this road, because it really will mean continuing environmental calamity and then ultimately collapse. And we've lost 4.5 million acres in California recently. We've seen record drought. We've seen record flooding all over the country, including, here in Maryland, where, there are entire towns where cars are washed down the street, and, And, what's going on in the Arctic is incredible with the rapid loss of the glaciers, and the polar bears are drowning and the walruses are vanishing, and they found mosquitoes up in the North Pole this year. So it's just really dramatic, the changes that are taking place. And we've got to act, but we should act with a sense of hope and pride that, look, humanity got us into this situation. Humanity can get us out. We can figure out some ways to get out of it, but we can't be in denial, and we can't fall for propaganda, much less authoritarianism and fascism. And why anybody would want to take us in that direction at this moment is beyond me.
Okay. Well, and so I'm going to put the next two questions, which I think are a nice segue from this as well. So, uh, Patrick asks, what's the most adept or maybe effective way to impact change without being on the front picket lines outside of voting? And then Connor is also asking about how we might enact change when we're stuck inside the middle of a pandemic. So I'm wondering if those two are kind of related, since that may be why we're not on the picket lines.
Yeah, those are some great questions. I mean, look, it's up to every generation to innovate its own modes of activism. I was so moved when somebody sent me yesterday this a video for a new group called Joy to the Polls, where they've been going to the polls and they bring music, and then they just do like a whole dance thing, and they get everybody dancing at the polls. And I thought that was so excellent. And but the first question is interesting because I don't know, I'm picking up the subtext of the person's kind of an introvert, and they're saying, what is a program of activism or for reconstruction for introverts, people who are not going to go out and be on picket lines, or maybe it's just because COVID-19, I don't know. But I think it's a great point. I mean, one silver lining in this whole nightmare has been the development of Zoom and people organizing online and being able to do stuff, through the new technologies. So I like that. And I don't think people have even begun to inventory and catalog the ways that political activism has changed. We've been doing a lot of phone banking in my campaign. We used to go door to door and just canvass, but we've been phone banking. And so phone banking is a great way to be able to have an impact on what's going on in Wisconsin and North Carolina and Pennsylvania, even if you're in Maryland. And, nobody cares where you're calling from. You're calling to say, hey, it's important to remember to vote, get your ballots in if you ordered them, and so on. But generally, I think that we've got a generation of young people they're a remarkable generation. I mean, they're really beyond, as far as I can tell, racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny and all of this stuff. I mean, unfortunately, they're a little bit beyond grammar too. I wish they'd spend a little more time on their English skills, but other than that, I find nothing, and my kids are in this age range with the people in college today and just getting out of college. And I've got great faith in them and great confidence in their ability to innovate and to come up with what needs to be done. And a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the desperation tactics by the president and his party are a reflection of the sense that American politics is moving against them. They understand that the demographics are totally on the side of the Democrats. The new generation is not homophobic. They support marriage equality. They can't even imagine that there was a time when gay people couldn't get married. They support Black Lives Matter. And they want to see the government have an active role as an instrument of equality and participation and meaningful economic growth for the people, as well as environmental protection, and not just the government as an instrument of incarceration and prosecution and war and all of those things.
Great. Okay, so the next two questions, I like to pair. It's interesting how they're kind of pairing themselves up, but they both have to do with what you're talking about in terms of just this new realization, right? That there is a wave of people who care about making things better, and so Melissa's asking about the Supreme Court is now a majority of conservatives. However, as a country, we're not even 50% conservatives. She asks, what can we do to make sure that our voices are heard at the Supreme Court level? Is there anything?
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. I just saw another email, another chat flash up saying, what was the second Reconstruction? I was using that as a shorthand for the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement, as kind of the second Reconstruction. That's what they used to call it. But, the point is an excellent point. The GOP has lost the popular vote in 5 of the last 6 elections, and yet has a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court right now. Something is wrong with that. And we are going to have to deal with that after the election, again, because the Supreme Court is an active force of conservative judicial activism, invalidating progressive statutes and carving them up, like in Shelby County versus Holder, where the conservative majority, 5-4 majority in the court, decapitated the Voting Rights Act and the pre-clearance requirement, saying it was out of date. And there's no problems of race discrimination in voting anymore. They're so few and far between, to which Justice Ginsburg offered just the imperishable rejoinder. That's like saying, if you've got an umbrella in a thunderstorm and you're not getting wet, you don't need the umbrella anymore. It's like the reason why we were not having disenfranchisement in all of these states and jurisdictions was because of the Voting Rights Act. And it's not a reason to invalidate the Voting Rights Act, because then you're going to get what we're seeing right now, which is all forms of disenfranchisement and voter suppression, like the governor Abbott in Texas just limited each county to 1 ballot drop-off box. 1 in each county. There's counties down there, Harris County, with more than 3 million people, and they've got 1 drop-off box for 3 million people. Come on. So that's what we're up against now.
Yeah. Okay. And so the sort of partner question to that is about the realization of the corruption that's in government and in big corporations. These are like, little questions here for you. So,
yeah. Well, there's a great
and
article there, it starts at the top, and it starts in the top both in terms of having corruption pervade government and society and economy, but also symbolically, it sends completely the wrong message. I think it was Justice Brandeis who said that the government is the omnipresent teacher of the people. So here we've got a president who becomes the first president in the history of the United States who refuses to stop doing business while he's president. He has more than 500 different business entities. He doesn't divest himself at all. He doesn't create a blind trust. He says he will remove himself mostly from day-to-day management. That'll be up to the kids, but he'll just oversee it. And it's very clear it's been a money-making operation from day one. So if you check out today's Washington Post, millions and millions and millions of dollars being collected from foreign governments in violation of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, United Arab Emirates, Indonesia, and millions of dollars looted from the Treasury, from the taxpayers, as they go down to Mar-a-Lago and they go to Bedford or whatever it's called in New Jersey, the golf course. They go to Ireland, they go to Scotland, they go to where more than a third of his days as president have been spent at Trump properties. And they're charging the Secret Service and the FBI and the Department of Justice and State and the White House and so on, millions and millions of dollars. And the president says in answer, I don't even accept my salary. That's the only thing you're allowed to accept is your salary. The Constitution says the president is entitled to his salary in office and may accept no other emoluments from the government. So I'm hoping this is something during the lame duck period that Speaker Pelosi will see fit to bring to the floor. My resolution of disapproval of all these emoluments and a demand that this money be paid back to the people. It doesn't belong to him. It should all be paid back to the government.
So, yeah. Okay. So, should be paid back to the government. Franz, who I believe is calling in from UMBC, I think he's a student there, wants to know what we can do to make the criteria such that someone like Trump could not be nominated for president. What can we do to make the U.S. more like Plato's Republic, he asks, or somewhere else that has better criteria for its leaders? Take that as you may.
That is a beautiful academic question. And that's the kind of thing you could stay up to 2 o'clock in the morning talking to your roommates about. I mean, look, the Constitution of the United States says in order to run for president, you got to be 35 years old. you have to be a born US citizen. You can't be naturalized, which is wrong. And we should change that. And then basically that's it, right? And so there have been other efforts to try to impose different kind of physical or mental tests on it, and it doesn't work. And that's probably best just because we're a democracy. But I will say, and I feel your pain, Franz, I will say that there's been a demolition of critical thinking skills in the public. And I'm shocked at the way that some of my colleagues will go along with anything the president says. I mean, if he wakes up, he says, the dictator of North Korea is our best friend, then he's our best friend. If he wakes up and he says, we're going to nuclear war against North Korea, then we're going to nuclear war against North Korea. And they don't ask any questions. And so that to me resembles much more a religious cult than a political party. Like, I didn't think the price of belonging to a political party was you had to stop thinking for yourself and you couldn't ask critical questions, right? So, I guess what I would say is we've got to try to rebuild critical thinking skills, and we've got to demand much more of our political leaders. And we have to oppose all of those tendencies to authoritarianism in our basic social institutions.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is maybe a bit of a rhetorical one, but I think Jaleesa has a good point for us. Her question is, do you agree that laws should reflect changes in society?
Yeah, we absolutely. I mean, Thomas Paine used to say that the nation belongs to the living. Thomas Jefferson used to say the same thing. That that's the purpose of democracy. That we are not governed by decisions that people made before if we want to change them. I think Jefferson said that, to require people to be bound and governed by what worked 100 years ago is like saying that a man should be wearing the clothes that he wore as a toddler. And it doesn't make sense. So yes, I am with that, which isn't to say that everything was wrong. I mean, a lot of what we've been trying to do is to defend principles that have been trashed from the past, right? But it is up to us, and I think the beauty of democracy is that we can enact new laws and we can change the Constitution. I'll tell you about a conversation I had with one of my Republican colleagues who left Congress in the last one, in the 115th Congress, Trey Gowdy, but he said to me, Raskin, you're not a bad guy, but the problem with you is you're a liberal. I said, you're damn right I'm a liberal. The heart of the word liberal is liberty. And if we're not for liberty, then what is the value that we're defending in politics? And I said, and I'm a progressive because the heart of that word is progress. And if we're not making progress, then what are we doing in government? And then I really stuck it to him. And I said, but these days, my favorite thing to call myself is a conservative because I want to conserve the land and the air and the water and the climate system and Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air. Everything you guys want to destroy is everything I want to conserve. I don't even know why you call yourself a conservative anymore. I mean, you want to conserve your own wealth and power. That's not enough for an honorable intellectual tradition like conservatism.
So that's really interesting. Jaleesa also, she followed up with an interesting point because maybe there is a different side to this too. She says many of the classmates in her American government class actually disagreed with this and believed that we need to interpret laws and constitutions the way that our founding fathers wrote them. So maybe there's a balance.
I didn't realize she's talking about interpretation. She's not talking about passage of laws. She's talking about interpretation. Well, okay, so that's an interesting question. Okay. Well, let's start with this. The people who call themselves originalists, first of all, they never live up to that. They're not really interested in what the original meanings of the Constitution were. And they never talk about the original meaning, for example, of the 14th Amendment and equal protection. And if you look at the 14th Amendment, it's gigantic, it's huge, but they never mention that. They're not interested in the original meanings of the Reconstruction Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? So basically what they're looking for ways to try basically to overturn Roe versus Wade and Griswold versus Connecticut and the right of privacy. I mean, let's just grab the bull by the horns here. What they don't believe in is women's reproductive freedom and abortion. And we know that's a lot of what animates Amy Barrett and her politics, and so on. But the Supreme Court, in that line of cases, in Griswold, Roe versus Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, said that it invoked the Ninth Amendment. You know, the Ninth Amendment says the enumeration of particular rights in the Bill of Rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. And there, the court, a big majority in the court, said there is a right of privacy in procreation and reproductive decision-making. And, you know, if the government is big enough and intrusive enough to tell you that it can compel you to have a child against your will and to prevent you from having an abortion if you want one, it can also tell you that you must have a child or you cannot have a child. And of course, we have a history in America of the government sterilizing parts of the population deemed unfit, and they would allow that too. If women don't have a right of reproductive freedom, why can't the government compel you not to have children? And that's happening as recently as now in certain immigration detention centers where immigrants are being held and have been given hysterectomies without being told what's happening. So, you know, this is kind of a culture clash where a lot of us believe, look, it's your body, it's your life, it's your right to decide. It's not up to the government to be dictating. And others feel the government should be able to dictate that choice. That's really all that's about, despite all of the fancy rhetoric about originalism and textualism. That's really all they're talking about. In terms of statutes, I mean, statutes should be interpreted in a way that vindicates the purpose of Congress in passing it. But you need look no further than the Shelby County versus Holder case, where the Supreme Court is decapitating the Voting Rights Act, totally undermining the purpose of Congress, which wanted to make sure that people had the right to vote and that jurisdictions had to submit to the courts, pre-submit any changes to voting that could affect people's voting rights. And the court was very happy to knock that down. So don't fall for any of the propaganda, you know.
Jalissa, I hope that gave you some great talking points when you get back to class. With that was fantastic. Okay, so here is an interesting one. This is from Lucas, who says he went to high school with conservatives for 4 years and he was the only Democrat. And his question to you is, how do you get along with your Republican colleagues?
Well, in Annapolis, when I was a state senator, great. I mean, there's wonderful conviviality and socializing that goes on. You know, for the most part, I think more than 125 of my bills passed, and the vast majority of them, more than 90%, were with bipartisan support, including marriage equality, including abolition of the death penalty, where we had Republicans on it. A lot of the drug liberalization laws, a lot of the younger Republicans have somewhat more of a libertarian thinking, and I was able to, you know, make common cause a lot with them. Washington is a far more polarized situation, and as you can see, like from the Republicans in the Senate about the Barrett nomination, about impeachment, they do act with lockstep uniformity on most things. There's tremendous discipline there, and I liken it to a religious cult. I mean, imagine if Donald Trump, rather than attacking people who wear masks, rather than mocking Joe Biden for wearing a mask, you know, rather than not wearing a mask for months and months and months and avoiding it, what if he had said, you know what, we've been invaded by China and everybody's got to wear one of these masks and we're going to call it a patriot mask. At that point, millions and millions of his followers would all be wearing the masks, and it would all say MAGA on it, or, you know, red, white, and blue, or whatever. And they'd be beating people up who don't wear masks instead of beating up the people who are asking them to put the mask on when they enter their store or their restaurant, right? But that is the hallmark of a religious cult. You just do what your cult leader tells you to do. That's how we end up in Jonestown. I told some Republicans I was hanging out with a couple weeks ago when we got out of session, I said, when all of this is over, you guys are going to be selling flowers and incense at Dulles Airport. You know, you're going to be working in a cult.
Yeah, it smells of Alice in Wonderland if you think of it in terms of that.
Yes.
That's pretty interesting. Where was it? So Connor wanted to know, okay, so if a young person does want to get involved in politics, wants to run for Congress, doesn't have money to get started, what can they do?
It's a great question. I want to give you two pieces of advice. Okay. Number one, I want to tell you young people what I tell the kids in soccer at age 6. Okay. Don't bunch. Don't bunch. Not everybody needs to live together in Brooklyn or DuPont Circle or, even Silver Spring, which I love, which is, the heart of my district. Like, go to West Virginia and go to South Carolina. Get your 10 best friends. Everybody move to Alaska. This is what we need in America today, because we're getting this kind of residential segmentation and segregation. We need, there are a lot more people in the blue coalition and the red coalition, but they're all concentrated. They tend to be concentrated in certain places. So spread out. Okay. But the second question about money that you're asking is a great question. Look, I mean, that's just a reality. You have got to, I tell young people who want to go in politics, I say, that is fantastic. You hang on to that and you do it, but it is important to have a career and get a job. And it's important, one, because you might lose, because anybody can lose, and you need to have practical skills and talents. And that was the vision of the founders, that it's not a career that you make for your whole life, but it's something that people take turns at. And, we have rotation in office, and I'm a Democrat who favors term limits. I like term limits. I think people should take turns. But the other thing is, when you get into office, if you actually have a skill, a trade, whether you're a mathematician or you're a plumber or you're a farmer or you're like a constitutional law professor like me, whatever it is, you will have something to contribute to the group. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen members of Congress or the legislature defer to somebody just because of their profession and what they know. I had a colleague in Annapolis in the state Senate who was a former chief of police in Howard County. And when anything came up about practical policing, people listened to him, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. I had a colleague, a very right-wing colleague, Andy Harris, who's a surgeon. And we were together, we're in Congress together now. We were in the state Senate back then. But if he talked about something medical, people defer to him. They listen to him. So in other words, like, you should have a mastery over a body of knowledge and work that gives you a platform to stand on, rather than just, I've spent my whole life working on political campaigns. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it just gives you a lot more credibility and legitimacy when you're in. And then at this point, with the internet and so on, don't worry about the money. The money will come. If you've got something to say, if you're playing a role, people will say, hey, you should really think about running for the city council or running for state legislature or whatever it is. Don't be like my Republican opponent in 2020, who couldn't be bothered to work at the local level or the state level, immediately just wanted to run for Congress, and opens up every debate saying, I'm a rocket scientist at NASA. So, and I say, hey, I'm no rocket scientist, but I've done a lot of community service in my day. And I think that is a very high calling, to be able to serve other people, because none of us in public office is a king or a queen or a lord or an emperor, any of that. We are the servants of the people. We are public servants.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And just a plug for those who are on the call tonight, that we will be having Will Jawando, who's one of our local county council members, come in. And so it's really nice for us to realize that, politics doesn't all happen at the federal level. There's so much that can be done, and maybe with less partisanship, which is fantastic. I've got to ask this question because it comes from a colleague of mine who is a counselor, and I know she speaks for a lot of students. She wants to know if you ever hear from your Republican colleagues about how much they dislike Trump.
I get asked that question. That might be the single most often asked question I get. They really want to know, like, behind the scenes, are they willing to admit it? And once or twice I've gotten a smile out of them or something. And, I say to them, would you really, if Barack Obama were president and we just lost 200,000 of our people in a pandemic and there's no plan to deal with it, would you really be blaming it on the World Health Organization right now or China? And they'll kind of look at me like, "Oh, I'm not dealing with you. I'm not, So, the, I had a friend in the last Congress um, who was from Texas, right? Congressman Smith, and he was the chair of the House Committee on Science and Technology. And I thought, this guy could be my friend. I mean, he, he's into science and everything. And so one day we're in the Judiciary Committee, we're sitting there, and I said, we can disagree about reproductive freedom and tax policy and everything, but you guys have really got to get serious about climate change, because it's going to be the death of us all. And it's going to end our civilization. And he said, well, he has a great Southern Texas accent. He said, well, Jamie, he said, you got your scientists and we got our scientists. And I said, wait, that's not how science works. It's not like rival partisan teams, right? Okay. And I said, look, let's go to we're in front of a computer. I said, let's go to all the great scientific installations in my district. We'll go to FDA, we'll go to NIH, we'll go to NOAA. All of them, you look at the websites, they all say the same thing. The professional scientists agree climate change is real. It's real and it's an emergency and it's bearing down on us and we got to act. And he said, well, Jamie, I don't want to get in a big fight with you. And he said, but let me tell you this about professionals. Professionals built the Titanic. Amateurs built Noah's Ark. Okay. So I said, wait a second, Lamar, let me take a second to focus on this. Professionals built the Titanic. And I don't think there was anything wrong with the design of the Titanic. I think it was human error in the conduct of the ship. But okay, amateurs built Noah's Ark. Okay, so you're saying you want an amateur flying you back to Texas this weekend? You want an amateur performing open heart surgery on someone in your family? Like, I mean, you want two people in our species to survive? What does it mean? So there really are fundamental value differences. I know people always want me to be able to tell them that, like, yeah, they know how wrong all of this is, and they're just kind of winking at it. But I don't think it's true anymore. I think, because of the well-known scientific phenomenon of cognitive dissonance, they've convinced themselves that there really is a debate about climate change. That there's really a scientific debate about whether it's occurring or not. And that's a tragic thing. We're the only country in the world where this is happening. And it is disabling in terms of our ability to get anything done.
Yeah, wow. Well, listen, we have about just a couple more minutes, and there still are more questions here. And I would love to hear you speak on all of these. But I want to give you a chance to just kind of, wrap us up here a little bit and give us our marching orders. What do you think? What do you think we should be doing at this moment or in the next year?
Well, look, first of all, thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation. I love your students. And if you send me the questions I didn't get to, I'll make sure I can answer the people that we weren't able to get all the way through them. And I'd love to see what everybody's got to say, commenting on this stuff. It's been a really challenging time for young people. And I know, because my kids are in their 20s, and I feel really bad about just the destruction of extended family life. People can't see their cousins, their uncles, their aunts, their grandparents, the destruction of social life. I mean, my kids won't even explain to me what it means to be dating in the COVID-19 period, and I can't even imagine the stuff that people go through. Is very, very difficult. But I want to say that this generation is really a wonderful generation. It's got so much to offer America, and we're counting on you. And my young colleagues, like AOC in the House of Representatives, I place a lot of faith in and a lot of confidence in, and I'm completely with them. And I defend them at every turn against all the attacks, because, a lot of it is generational. People don't want to see it the same way, but it's like we're saying about Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson. Like, every generation has got to define its own political program and values, and I view it as my role to try to be a bridge between the more senior people, like the Speaker Pelosi age people, and the AOC and Rashida and all of my younger friends. And but we're going to get through this, and we're going to get it through together, and we're going to be stronger than we ever were before. So other generations of Marylanders have been through similar struggles over our history. So I'll leave you with the words of two people, okay? One, the great Marylander Frederick Douglass, who was born about 45 minutes away from where I sit on the Wye River plantation into slavery. He escaped from slavery into freedom to become a great freedom fighter, an abolitionist, and then agitator for Reconstruction and for change in the country. And he said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. The struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And for those of you who are interested in the new state song that I wrote to replace our terrible pro-Confederate anthem, it's based on those words from Frederick Douglass. You can go online or go to Google or whatever, just put in Maryland, My Maryland, the Free State song, okay? And then I'm gonna leave you with the words of the great Tom Paine, who came over to America to fight with us against the kings and the queens and the monarchs and the theocrats and the kleptocrats and the dictators and the tyrants. And in 1776, it was a tough time. And they said half the country was still with the ancien regime and half the country wanted revolutionary change. But could you really build a government on a democratic principle when all history had known was dictatorship and theocracy and monarchy? And he wrote this pamphlet to give people hope and encouragement during the winter of discontent. And so he said this, I'm going to update the language so it doesn't offend modern sensibilities. Speaker Pelosi always makes me do that. And she says Tom Paine wouldn't mind. And I think she's right, he wouldn't mind it. But he said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. These are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause in their country. But everyone who stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end is our victory. So that victory will be ours with your engagement, with your involvement. Thank you for having me tonight, Rebecca. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you again so much for joining us
Thank
tonight.
you very much. Send me an email to my office. I'll put you on my list and you'll never be lonely again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.